So I thought I'd make another episode of Prologue is amazing because I haven't for a few days, and I thought off the hand I'd talk about books related to programming that I read. I can't remember if maybe I mentioned them before, but I'll just do it again because I was talking to somebody about it the past couple of days. So one, the first book on programming I learned programming from was Philip and Alex's Guide to Web Publishing by Philip Greenspun. Philip Greenspun was is I mean now he's some kind of pilot or pilot instructor. He was doing he did a PhD at MIT where in I think in the late 90s, where his PhD thesis was on how to create internet web applications, right? So database backed applications, where that was the big thing in the 90s, like the dot com bubble. And it was about, and so he kind of made lots of money in that. He kind of sold a company for 70 million or something. And then he retired after that. And it was about you use a relational database, like he was talking about Oracle, but nowadays it's like Postgres, MySQL, and the way you should build it is by basically most of your stuff is in the database, and then the front end you can do any language, like he was using TCL because he was like doing AOL server, which is back then, but it's like nowadays it would be like PHP or Python, right? You use some kind of template language, but the majority of the logic or skills should be in the database, right? And so I learned that from him, and the basics of programming and that kind of stuff. Then there's another book called Structure, and also he was, he's a smart guy. He got accepted to MIT at age 16, I think, to study maths at MIT. So he is a smart guy, and after that he created a series of companies in his 20s, and then he went back to MIT to do a PhD in this at the late 90s, and then sold his company, and then um, he ended up just retiring. I think he was in his 30s then or something, and then became a pilot since then. So then the next book is Structure and Interpretation of Computer Programs. I think because he was at MIT and his professors were the guys who wrote Structure and Interpretation of Computer Programs, maybe somehow I went to that angle. That book, I read it, but it was a difficult read for me back then, and I didn't do any of the exercises. And the way that works is you should do the exercises in it. Without the exercises, it's not that useful. But it is a good book. I learned, bits and drabs. It was just too complicated for me in my early 20s, or I was 21 or something. I was an idiot and I was lazy and I was not doing it properly. I was playing around with Linux and stuff, and so I was starting to do, I knew computers, I knew how to install stuff, I knew basics of stuff, but I didn't really know computer programming at all by then either. But from Philip, from reading stuff like that, I could install a website and get Apache or whatever running and have a website and install websites and customize them a bit. But I never made any money either from it, so it was just like a thing. So, and interpretation of computer programs is like a course from the 1980s in Scheme, which is a language like Lisp. Uh, it was written by Gerald Sussman and Hal Abelson. They were professors at MIT in the 70s and 80s. And in fact, their kind of claim to fame is like they were one of the first students, or some of the students of Marvin Minsky, right? The guy who created the MIT AI lab. And his claim to fame is poo pooing neural networks. Like he was like, neural networks won't work. Even though that's exactly what's ended up working, right? Like he was a proponent of good old fashioned AI back in the 70s. So that book is kind of a tour de force of computers. Like, in it they kind of build everything in computers, like a mini version of everything, right? Including operating systems, including relational databases, including programming languages, including like a mini computer, right? All in software inside the language scheme, right? So it's like, and it's a very hard course, even at MIT. Like most people, it's kind of like the MIT's version of the weed out course, right? It's like they purposely made the course so difficult. Maybe the most difficult course at MIT. It's like, if you want to come to MIT and you want to do computer science, you have to get through this in the first year. And so most people fail it because it's so difficult. But I think at MIT now they use Python in the first year, so they should drop that anyway. And there's a video series, The Structure and Interpretation of Computer Programs, that's on YouTube that you can watch from the 80s. It's got Hal Abelson and Gerald Sussman lecturing, and then there's the book, and the book is also available online for free. So then another thing I read was in the beginning was the command line by Neil Stephenson. It's an essay and it's a very good one. It's about, the importance of Linux and open source, right? So that's a good read. Then there's the book of art they called The Art of Unix Programming, which is very good. It's online and it's a lot about software and the Unix system and software in general, and how it's kind of like an artistic medium and what constitutes a good program. And so it's a very nice read, and it does some sample programs and things. So now there's also two other books, Founders at Work and Coders at Work, which I kind of read, not fully, but they're like the Coders at Work is interviews with computer programmers, famous ones. Founders at Work is interviews with famous computer programmers. Then there's a book called The Power of Prolog, which I found much later, I think, in my mid 30s or late 30s, and it's about Prolog, and it's written by Marcus Triska, and it's like a recent book. And it's a good book about, why Prolog is so good. Then also, back then in my 20s, I read On Lisp by Paul Graham. Paul Graham created Y Combinator, so things like Reddit and Airbnb and others came out of it. There's the Hacker News website that he created, but before then he was famous. Like, he kind of got famous because he sold a Yahoo store for 40 million, and he talked about how he used Lisp in it, and it kind of made me interested in programming from that angle too. And he was like, Lisp is amazing, and then I read the book called On Lisp, which is a lot about why Lisp is amazing, why Lisp macros are amazing, and why Prolog is amazing, because he kind of writes a version of Prolog in there and describes why it's so good. That and then from like Y Combinator, it's like Sam Altman was one of the people there, and then Sam Altman became head of Y Combinator after Paul Graham retired. And I actually spoke by email to Paul Graham a couple of times because I trolled on Y Combinator on Hacker News, and then he emailed me. He's like, "Why are you doing trolling me and stuff?" And so, because I was trolling Paul Buchheit, the inventor of Gmail, on there, and Paul Buchheit is a friend of Paul Graham, so I got like a little taste of interacting with famous people through there, or famous in tech. And Sam Altman went on to start OpenAI with Elon Musk, and nowadays, like he's all in the news, right? But back then, he was like part of Y Combinator and Hacker News. So, are there other books? Artificial Intelligence: A Modern Approach by Peter Norvig. That's a good book. All these things were really exciting me to me back then in the 2000s and the 2000 early 2010s maybe, but during the 2000s, right? These were, and I was learning to program, and I didn't really know it yet, but I was so excited about the possibility if I could. And something like Artificial Intelligence: A Modern Approach is a really good book because it has a lot of algorithms in it that, and then you can implement them. And I didn't implement them, but you could. And, but it's a kind of like a broad overview of AI, but kind of like problem solving itself, right? And there's another good books in that vein, like algorithms and data structures. I can't name the ones that I kind of read. Um, there are so many other books I've read or skimmed through. I can't remember the names now, but these are the main ones I can remember. And then when I eventually learned programming properly in my late 20s, I was like 27 or something. I learned it in Python, and the Python manual and Stack Overflow were extremely important. And then the thing with programming is you learn by doing, right? So reading about it won't really get you there. It's like you just start typing and having programs run, and then you start to build the muscle memory for how to do it, and then you do it, right? And then it kind of becomes trivial, and it's not like some black magic. Like if you don't know programming yet, it looks like black magic, and it looked like that to me in my early 20s. But once you do it, then it's like, oh, it's trivial. Um, so yeah, and then a brief history. I'll just talk about myself a bit. It's like after I did Python, then I started learning about Prolog a bit, and I got familiar with that. Then I think I learned Prolog before I learned Python 8 because Prolog is really a simple language, and if you're not a programmer, actually, you can do a lot with it already, even before you learn programming properly. But Python, I did for 1 or 2 years, and then I eventually started hearing about stuff like Haskell. There was a whole Haskell craze in the late 2000s, and then I learned that, and I was amazed by it. And then also, I think before Haskell, I learned OCaml, and then I went to Haskell, and they were all amazing revelations. And even today, or through the 2010s, I basically did programming in either Haskell or OCaml. And once you get used to Haskell or OCaml, you like languages like Python or even Lisp, they're just not good enough. Or Java or any other language, right? Because the types give you so much structure that it's like when you're using a language like Python or wherever, you're like, oh my god, like I don't know what I'm doing anymore because errors will just go through and whatever. When once you've used a language like OCaml or Haskell, which is always telling you every error before every time you press a button, press enter, it will tell you, oh, you did that wrong, right? So it's amazing way and the structuring of your program. I tend to like if I use OCaml or Haskell, I tend to write, especially in OCaml, I tend to write the type out first. In Haskell, I tend to write the type signature, function signature first, and that's how I tend to operate. So yeah, those are the languages, and mostly I just did a lot of coding, and I think I wrote 500,000 lines of code. Maybe that's not a lot really, but I think there was a point where it's like I estimated, like I just had some files and I just put them through WC on the command line as like, oh, it was like 200,000 or something. And then I was like, or I've deleted lots of stuff before then, and since then I've done stuff. So it added up to that. I kind of stopped programming around about the late 2010s, and I haven't really done anything since then. So my coding was basically between 2008 maybe and 2018 or something like that. So yeah, that's brief history of my coding. Also SQL, and I used to enter competitions like on Kaggle. At one point I was in the top 1000 on Kaggle, like the top 1%. That was like 2012 or something, where Kaggle first was a thing. Now it has lots of people, millions, I think. Back then it had about 100,000 entrants. So yeah, and then there's another project, I think Eureka or something. Yeah, there's some kind of coding site where there's, little algorithms you do, and then I like doing them, and I got to like the fourth or fifth one on that, like Project Euler. Yeah. So I like doing those and trying different languages on that, like usually OCaml, Haskell, and Prolog on that. And that's a good way to build your programming skills as well, because it's like interesting problems to solve. They're algorithmic challenges, and but they're small and short. So these are all, I had to make a podcast, so I'll just do a brain dump there, and that's it.